a man in a worn leather jacket walked into a $45 million wedding. The mother of the groom took one look at him and called security. "Get this homeless man off my property," she said. "He is probably here to steal something." She had him dragged out twice. She called him a vagrant, a piece of garbage. But then her own son saw the man, and he did something that made every guest gasp. He dropped to his knees. "Mother," he said, his voice shaking, "you just humiliated the man who saved my life." What happened next changed everything. And the truth about this stranger will leave you speechless. The Ashworth wedding was the kind of event that made headlines in society magazines long before the first guest arrived. Nestled in the rolling hills of Carmel Valley, California, the estate sprawled across 12 acres of manicured gardens, ancient oak trees, and vineyards that caught the golden afternoon light like something from a painting. The property was valued at $45 million, and on this particular Saturday in late September, it had been transformed into a fairy tale setting for the union of Tristan Ashworth and his beloved Vivian. Over 300 guests had received calligraphed invitations printed on Italian linen paper. The flowers had been flown in from Holland just 2 days prior. The wine was a carefully curated selection of vintage bottles from 1998, chosen specifically because it was the year Tristan was born. Every single detail had been orchestrated with military precision, and the woman behind it all stood at the center of the reception area like a general surveying her troops before battle. Cordelia Ashworth was a striking woman in her early 60s, though she would never admit to being a day over 50. 2. Her hot couture gown had cost $50,000, and the diamond necklace resting against her collarbone was a family heirloom that she wore like armor. She moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had spent her entire adult life navigating high society. There was a clear difference in how Cordelia treated people. When she spoke to the wife of a state congressman, her voice was warm honey, dripping with charm. When she turned to give instructions to a passing server, that warmth vanished instantly, replaced by clipped commands delivered without a single please or thank you. The server might as well have been invisible. This was Cordelia's day to shine. Her only son was getting married, and every influential person in Northern California had come to witness it. Near the ceremonial arch draped in white roses, the groom stood with a peculiar expression on his face. Tristan Ashworth was a handsome man of 26, with kind eyes that seemed somehow out of place in this world of calculated smiles. He kept glancing toward the main gate, his fingers fidgeting with his cufflinks. Vivian, radiant in her wedding gown, noticed her soon-to-be husband's distraction. She touched his arm gently. "You keep looking at the gate. Are you expecting someone?" Tristan turned to her. "There is someone very important I invited. Someone I really hope shows up today." "Ooh, you never mentioned anyone special." He hesitated. "He is the reason I am standing here today, Viv. Literally. I will explain everything later. I was planning to introduce him during my speech." "Does your mother know about this person?" Tristan's jaw tightened. "No, and there is a reason for that." I was waiting for the right moment. Before Vivian could ask more questions, a cousin pulled her away to take photographs, and Tristan was left alone with his anxious anticipation. He checked his phone again. No messages. He looked at the gate again. Still no sign. At precisely 4:17 in the afternoon, a man walked through the service entrance at the side of the property. He moved quietly, trying not to draw attention to himself, though in this particular crowd, that was nearly impossible. He wore a weathered leather jacket that had clearly seen better days, the kind of jacket that develops character through years of use. His jeans were faded to a soft blue, comfortable rather than fashionable. His boots were scuffed at the toes from countless miles of walking. His hair was slightly longer than conventional, and a few days of stubble shadowed his jaw. He wore no watch, no rings, no visible signs of wealth whatsoever. In a sea of designer suits and couture gowns, he stood out immediately. The man paused just inside the gate, his eyes scanning the crowd for Tristan. The wedding was larger than he had anticipated, and the groom was nowhere in immediate sight. He began walking toward the reception area, hoping to find a quiet spot where he could wait. Two security guards exchanged uncertain glances. The man did not look threatening, but he also did not look like he belonged among the Cartier watches and Hermes scarves. Before they could decide what to do, a sharp voice cut through the ambient noise. "Security! Who is this man? Why is he on my property?" Cordelia Ashworth had spotted the intruder from across the lawn, and she was already moving toward him with the determined stride of someone who had never been told no. The guests in her path parted like water, and within moments, she was standing directly in front of the stranger, her eyes traveling from his worn boots to his unkempt hair with undisguised contempt. The man stopped walking. He offered a small, polite smile. "Good afternoon. This is a private event," Cordelia said, her voice carrying just enough for nearby guests to hear. "A very exclusive private event. I do not know how you got past the gate, but you do not belong here. Mom, I was invited. If I could just speak to Tristan." "Tristan." Cordelia's eyebrows rose sharply. "You dare to speak my son's name as if you know him." "I do know him. We met several years ago, and he asked me to." "I do not know what kind of scheme you are running." Cordelia interrupted, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "But let me make something very clear. This estate is worth $45 million. The guests here represent the finest families in American society." She paused, looking him up and down with theatrical disdain. "You look like you just crawled out from under a highway overpass." The man's smile faded slightly, but his voice remained calm. "I understand this might seem unusual, but if you would just let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you thought you could wander into a wedding and help yourself to the food. Perhaps pocket a few items from the gift table." Cordelia's laugh was sharp and brittle. "I have seen your type before. You smell money and come running like a stray dog hoping for scraps." Several guests had stopped their conversations to watch. Some pulled out phones. Others whispered behind their hands, eyes gleaming with the excitement of witnessing someone else's humiliation. The two security guards reached the scene. "Mom, should we remove him?" "Yes, immediately. And make sure he does not find his way back in." Cordelia turned to the gathering crowd, her voice rising. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. It seems we have attracted an uninvited visitor who does not understand the concept of private property. Our security team is handling the situation." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. A woman in an emerald dress leaned toward her husband. "Can you imagine the audacity? Walking in here dressed like that. Probably thought he could blend in." The husband replied with a smirk. "As if anyone would mistake him for one of us." The stranger allowed the security guards to take his arms, offering no resistance. His eyes moved across the crowd, taking in faces, noting who laughed, who looked away. When his gaze passed over a group of young women in designer dresses, one of them, a blonde in pale pink, made a show of holding her clutch closer to her body. "Make sure nothing is missing," she said loudly to her friends. "You never know with these people." As the guards led him toward the gate, they passed the garden area near the old stone wall. An elderly man who had been trimming roses looked up at the commotion. He was perhaps 70 years old, with weathered hands and kind eyes. His name was Edgar, and he had worked as the groundskeeper for over 20 years. When Edgar saw the stranger being escorted out, he froze. His pruning shears slipped from his fingers. His face went pale, and then, very slowly, he removed his worn cap and held it against his chest in a gesture of unmistakable respect. The stranger noticed. He gave Edgar a small nod as he passed, and something unspoken seemed to flow between them. Cordelia caught the exchange. Her eyes narrowed. "Edgar! What are you doing? Why are you bowing to that vagrant?" Edgar fumbled to replace his cap. Nothing, ma'am. It is nothing. Get back to work. If I catch you acknowledging strangers like that again, you will find yourself looking for new employment. Yes, ma'am. Of course. Cordelia had already turned away, her attention on damage control. She smoothed her gown and transformed her expression back into the gracious hostess smile. The incident was over. The intruder was being removed. She did not notice the catering manager standing frozen near the champagne table, his face drained of color. She did not see the head butler press himself against a pillar, eyes wide with something like fear. She did not observe the housekeepers whispering urgently to each other. The staff knew something, but no one was willing to speak. Outside the main gate, the security guards released the stranger's arms. "Sorry about this, sir. We are just following orders." "I understand. You are doing your job." The guards retreated, leaving the man standing alone on the quiet road. Expensive cars continued to arrive. Mercedes, Bentleys, a red Ferrari, each carrying guests who would be welcomed with warm smiles. None of them glanced at the man by the stone pillar. To them, he was invisible. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen. His thumb hovered over Tristan's name. He could call. He could explain what happened. But this was Tristan's wedding day, the most important day of his life. The last thing the young man needed was a confrontation with his mother that would overshadow everything. He put his phone away. Instead, he walked to a stone bench beneath an old oak tree just outside the property walls. It was a peaceful spot, shaded and quiet, with a view of the valley. He sat down and settled in to wait. From here, he could hear the distant string quartet playing something elegant. He could see occasional camera flashes as the wedding party posed for photographs. He could smell flowers and food drifting on the warm California breeze. He had promised Tristan he would come, and he always kept his promises. So he waited as the sun continued its slow descent toward the western hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. 20 minutes passed on that stone bench outside the estate gates. The sun had shifted slightly, casting longer shadows across the valley road. The man in the weathered leather jacket sat perfectly still, watching luxury vehicles continue to stream through the entrance while string quartet music drifted over the walls like whispers from another world. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from Tristan. "Where are you?" "I have been looking everywhere." He typed back carefully. "I am outside the gate." There was a small problem. The response came almost instantly. "Problem? What problem?" "Stay there. I am coming out right now." He stared at the screen for a long moment. Inside those gates, Tristan was supposed to be celebrating the happiest day of his life. The ceremony would begin within the hour. The last thing the young man needed was to abandon his guests and come searching for someone outside. Before Tristan could leave the reception area, the man made a decision. He would go back in. He would find a quiet corner and wait until the appropriate moment. He had not driven 3 hours to sit on a bench outside, while the young man he had watched recover and rebuild his life exchanged vows with the woman he loved. He typed quickly, "Do not worry. I will find a way in. Focus on your wedding." Then he stood up, brushed off his jeans, and began walking around the perimeter of the property toward the service entrance he had noticed earlier. The staff gate was partially hidden behind a row of tall hedges, designed to keep the working machinery of wealthy events invisible to the guests who enjoyed them. A delivery truck was just pulling away, leaving the gate momentarily unattended. As he slipped through, a familiar figure appeared from behind a garden shed. Edgar, the elderly groundskeeper, was carrying a bundle of cut roses toward the main house. When he saw the stranger, his weathered face lit up with something between relief and worry. "Mr. Reeves?" Edgar's voice was barely above a whisper. "You came back. Please, sir, you must be careful. Mrs. Ashworth, she is—" "I know, Edgar." The man's voice was gentle. "Thank you for the warning. Sir, should I fetch young Mr. Tristan?" I could tell him you are here? No, please. I do not want to pull him away from his guests. This is his day. He paused, looking around the immaculate grounds. You have kept everything beautiful, Edgar. As always. The old groundskeeper's eyes grew misty. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. I have tried my best to care for this place the way you asked. I can see that. I appreciate it more than I can say. Sir, if there is anything I can do, just keep doing what you do, Edgar. I will find a spot to wait until the right moment. He moved deeper into the property, staying close to the edges where the decorative hedges provided some cover. His goal was simple: find an empty table at the periphery of the reception, sit quietly, and wait for an opportunity to catch Tristan's attention without causing a scene. He found what he was looking for near the back of the outdoor dining area. A small table, partially obscured by a trellis covered in climbing roses, sat empty while servers rushed past with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. He lowered himself into a chair and tried to make himself as inconspicuous as possible. It did not work. Within minutes, heads began to turn. In a sea of silk and designer labels, his faded jeans and worn leather jacket stood out like a smudge on a wedding photograph. Guests nudged each other, pointed with subtle gestures, whispered behind manicured hands. Is that the same man from before? How did he get back in? Someone should tell Cordelia. Someone did. The shriek that cut across the reception area could have shattered crystal. He is back! That vagrant is back on my property! Cordelia Ashworth came storming across the lawn like a force of nature, her designer heels stabbing the grass with each furious step. Guests scattered from her path, sensing the approaching storm. Within seconds, she was standing over the table, her face contorted with rage. Are you deaf? Did you not understand me the first time? Her voice trembled with barely contained fury. I told you to leave. I had you escorted out. And yet here you are, sitting at my son's wedding reception as if you belong here. The man rose slowly from his chair. Mom, I truly am an invited guest. If you would just let me explain. I do not want your explanations! Cordelia's voice rose to a pitch that drew every eye in the vicinity. I want you gone! Permanently. She spun to face the gathering crowd, her arms spread wide in theatrical outrage. Ladies and gentlemen, can you believe this? This person was removed from the property not 30 minutes ago. And here he is again, sneaking back in like a rat. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the onlookers. Some shook their heads in disgust. Others pulled out phones to document the spectacle. He must be desperate, someone muttered. Probably casing the place for a robbery. Another voice added. Beatrice, Cordelia's closest friend and social ally, pushed her way to the front of the crowd. She was a thin woman in her late 50s, dripping with diamonds and self-importance. Cordelia, darling, what on earth is happening? Who is this creature? A vagrant who keeps trying to infiltrate my son's wedding. Cordelia's lip curled with contempt. Look at him, Beatrice. Just look at him. He looks like he has not showered in a week. Beatrice made a show of examining the stranger, her nose wrinkling as if she had encountered a bad smell. Good heavens, he looks like he crawled out of a homeless shelter. Should we call the police? This is clearly harassment at this point. I am considering it, Cordelia replied darkly. Reginald Sinclair, a silver-haired man whose family had made their fortune in banking 3 generations ago, stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned in his life. The audacity is truly remarkable. These people have no sense of boundaries, no understanding of their place in the world. Hay probably smelled the money from miles away. Another guest chimed in. Like a vulture circling a carcass, society has become far too lenient with this sort of thing. Reginald continued, warming to his theme. In my father's day, someone like this would have been dealt with much more decisively. Through it all, the man in the leather jacket stood perfectly still. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He simply watched, his dark eyes moving from face to face, taking in every sneer, every cruel joke, every callous dismissal. A group of young women approached, led by a blonde in an expensive pink dress that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Her name was Clarissa, and she was the daughter of a tech billionaire who had made his fortune selling people's personal data to advertisers. "Excuse me," Clarissa said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I do not think we have been introduced. I am Clarissa. And you are? What exactly?" "The entertainment." Her friends giggled behind her. "Do you know how much this dress cost?" Clarissa continued, smoothing the fabric with practiced vanity. "Probably more than your entire annual income." "Oh wait, I forgot. You probably do not have an income, do you?" The laughter grew louder. "Are you here looking for a rich wife?" Another girl asked. "Because I hate to break it to you, but no one here is that desperate. Maybe he is looking for scraps from the buffet." Clarissa added, eliciting another round of cruel amusement. "Should we call the caterers and ask them to set aside some leftovers?" The man looked directly at Clarissa, and something in his gaze made her laughter falter for just a moment. There was no anger in his eyes, no defensiveness. Just a deep, quiet sadness that seemed somehow worse than any furious response could have been. "You know," he said softly, "I have worn this jacket for 15 years. It is comfortable, and it reminds me that a person's value does not come from labels or price tags." Clarissa's smile froze on her face. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or the faintest whisper of shame. Then her expression hardened. "Did you hear that? He is trying to lecture us about values." She turned to her friends with an exaggerated eye roll. "A homeless man giving life advice. How precious." "The absolute nerve," one of her friends agreed. Cordelia seized control of the situation once more. "Nuff, I will not have this spectacle continuing at my son's wedding." She raised her voice to address the staff members, hovering nervously at the edges of the scene. "No one is to serve this man anything. No one is to speak with him. He is to be completely ignored until security can remove him permanently." She began moving through the crowd like a general issuing orders, stopping at each cluster of guests to point out the intruder and ensure they understood the protocol. Within minutes, an invisible wall had formed around the man's table. Servers walked past without glancing in his direction. Guests turned their backs whenever they came near. He had been made a pariah in the most public way possible. He sat back down at the empty table, alone in the midst of hundreds of people. The isolation was almost physical, a bubble of contempt that surrounded him on all sides. He pulled out his phone, thought about texting Tristan again, then put it away. He would not ruin this day for the young man. He would wait. The sound of a powerful engine announced the arrival of another guest. A black Mercedes S-Class, gleaming like polished obsidian, pulled into the valet area. The door opened, and Marcus Whitfield stepped out. Marcus was one of the most successful businessmen in California, the CEO of Whitfield Industries, a conglomerate that had interests in everything from technology to real estate. He wore a tailored Armani suit that fit him like a second skin, and a Patek Philippe watch that cost more than most houses. He moved through the world with the easy confidence of someone who had never worried about money a day in his life. Cordelia spotted him immediately and hurried over to greet him. "Marcus! How wonderful that you could make it! We are so honored to have you here!" "Cordelia." Marcus accepted her air kisses with practiced grace. "Congratulations on Tristan's wedding. The estate looks magnificent." Thank you. We have worked so hard to make everything perfect." She took his arm, preparing to guide him toward the VIP area. "Come, let me introduce you to some people. The senator is here, and the Hendersons flew in from New York specifically for—" She stopped mid-sentence. Marcus had gone rigid, his face draining of color as if he had seen a ghost. "Marcus, what is wrong?" Marcus was not listening. His eyes were fixed on something across the lawn. a figure sitting alone at a table near the rose trellis, surrounded by an ocean of empty chairs. "Dear God," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. The champagne glass in his hand trembled, nearly slipping from his fingers. "It cannot be?" Cordelia followed his gaze to the man in the leather jacket. "Oh, that! Do not worry about him. He is just some vagrant who keeps trying to crash the wedding. Security will handle it." Marcus turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made Cordelia take an involuntary step backward. It was not anger exactly. It was something closer to horror. "What did you say?" His voice was strange, hollow. "What did you just call him?" "A vagrant. A crasher. Probably a thief." Cordelia waved dismissively. "Why? Do you know him?" Marcus did not answer. He was already walking toward the isolated table, his expensive shoes carrying him across the lawn with urgent purpose. Cordelia watched in disbelief as one of the wealthiest men in California approached the man she had just described as a homeless criminal. What happened next sent shockwaves through the entire reception. Marcus Whitfield stopped in front of the table and bowed his head in a gesture of unmistakable respect. "Mr. Reeves, I had no idea you would be here today." The man in the leather jacket smiled warmly. "Hello, Marcus. It has been a while." "Yes, sir. The company is doing well, thanks to your support. We exceeded projections last quarter." Marcus's voice was deferential, almost nervous. "Is there anything I can do for you?" "Anything at all. I am fine, Marcus. Just waiting for the right moment." Cordelia had followed Marcus across the lawn, and she stood frozen at the edge of the scene, unable to process what she was witnessing. Around her, the other guests had gone silent, their cruel jokes dying in their throats as they watched one of the most powerful men in the state treat the vagrant with obvious reverence. "Marcus." Cordelia's voice came out strangled. "What are you doing? Why are you bowing to him?" Marcus straightened, but his expression remained troubled. "Mrs. Ashworth, this is Mr. Keanu Reeves." "I do not care what his name is. He is a trespasser." "Or Mrs. Ashworth, please." Marcus lowered his voice, though it still carried to the nearest guests. "You need to stop. Right now." "Stop what?" "Protecting my property. My son's wedding." Cordelia's voice rose with indignation. "I do not know what kind of trick this man has played on you, but I am not so easily fooled." "It is not a trick." Marcus glanced at the man in the leather jacket, then back at Cordelia. His face was pale. This man could buy this entire estate 10 times over without noticing the expense. Cordelia laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. "Buy this estate? Look at him, Marcus. Look at what he is wearing. He looks like he lives under a bridge. Appearances can be deceiving, Mrs. Ashworth. And so can con artists." Cordelia pointed an accusatory finger at the seated man. "I do not know how you tricked Marcus, but it will not work on me. I know a fraud when I see one." The man spoke for the first time since Marcus's arrival. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Mrs. Ashworth, perhaps we should wait for Tristan. He can explain everything." "Do not you dare speak my son's name!" Cordelia's composure finally shattered. "You are a trespasser! A liar! I do not know what game you are playing, but I will see you arrested before this day is over." She pulled out her phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen. "I am calling my lawyer. And then I am calling the police. We will see who you really are when they run your fingerprints." Marcus stepped forward. "Mrs. Ashworth, please, I am begging you to reconsider." "Stay out of this, Marcus. You have clearly been manipulated by whatever story this man has told you." She pressed the phone to her ear. "Cedric, this is Cordelia. I need you at the estate immediately. We have a situation that requires legal intervention." A pause. "Yes, right now. Someone is attempting to defraud us. Bring everything you need." She hung up and fixed the man in the leather jacket with a triumphant glare. "My lawyer will be here in 15 minutes. He has handled cases against professional con artists before. Whatever scheme you are running ends today." The man did not respond. He simply sat there, his hands folded on the table, his expression unreadable. If Cordelia's threats worried him, he showed no sign of it. Marcus hovered nearby, looking like he wanted to say something more but uncertain how to proceed. The other guests had formed a loose semicircle around the scene, their earlier cruelty replaced by confused fascination. Something was happening that they did not understand, and the uncertainty made them nervous. Beatrice settled up to Cordelia. "Darling, are you sure about this? Marcus seems genuinely frightened of that man." Marcus has been fooled. It happens to the best of us. But there was a tremor in Cordelia's voice that had not been there before. Cedric will sort this out. He will expose this fraud for what he is. The man in the leather jacket looked toward the ceremonial area, where Tristan was presumably still unaware of the drama unfolding at the reception. His eyes held a deep sadness, the kind that comes from watching something painful unfold while being powerless to stop it. He had come here to celebrate, to watch a young man he cared about begin a new chapter in his life. Instead, he had become the center of a spectacle that would likely overshadow everything else about this day. But he did not leave. He did not argue. He simply waited, because somewhere inside that crowd, Tristan Ashworth was about to discover what was happening. And when he did, nothing at this wedding would ever be the same. The BMW 7 Series arrived like a silver bullet, its polished surface reflecting the late afternoon sun as it pulled into the circular drive. The engine had barely stopped before the driver's door swung open and a man stepped out with the purposeful stride of someone who billed by the hour. Cedric Holloway was everything a high society lawyer should be. His silver hair was impeccably groomed, his Hugo Boss suit fit, as though it had been sewn directly onto his body, and his leather briefcase probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had been the Ashworth family's legal counsel for 15 years, handling everything from real estate transactions to the occasional uncomfortable situation that required discretion and a firm understanding of how to make problems disappear. He spotted Cordelia immediately and made his way across the lawn, nodding briefly to guests who recognized him. "Cordelia, I came as quickly as I could. What seems to be the problem?" Cordelia grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the table where the man in the leather jacket still sat, surrounded by empty chairs and hostile stares. "That man! He has been trying to infiltrate my son's wedding, claiming he was invited, and somehow he has managed to fool Marcus Whitfield into thinking he is someone important." "Fool Marcus?" Cedric raised an eyebrow. "That is quite a claim. Marcus is not easily deceived. Well, he has been this time. Look at the man, Cedric. Look at what he is wearing. He is obviously some kind of professional con artist." Cordelia's voice dropped to a fierce whisper. "I want him arrested. Trespassing. Fraud. Whatever charges you can make stick. I want him gone, and I want him to pay for ruining my son's wedding." Cedric adjusted his glasses and turned to look at the alleged con artist. His expression was one of professional skepticism, the look of a man who had seen every trick in the book and was preparing to add another to his collection. Then he saw the face. The color drained from Cedric Holloway's cheeks so quickly that for a moment he looked like he might faint. His leather briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the ground with a heavy thud, papers scattering across the manicured grass. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Mr. Reeves." The words came out strangled, barely audible. The man at the table inclined his head slightly. "Hello, Cedric. It has been a while." Cordelia stared at her lawyer with growing alarm. "Cedric, what is wrong with you? Do you know this person?" Cedric did not answer. He was too busy trying to gather his scattered papers with hands that trembled visibly. When he finally straightened up, his face had gone from pale to an almost grayish color. "Cordelia." His voice was hoarse. "We need to speak privately." "Right now? Privately? Why? Just tell me who he is so we can have him arrested." I cannot do that." "What do you mean you cannot?" Cordelia's voice rose with frustration. "You are my lawyer. I am asking you to remove a trespasser from my property. That is precisely the problem. Cedric glanced nervously at the man, then back at Cordelia. This is not, Cordelia, please. Let us go somewhere quiet. But Cordelia was done with quiet. She was done with mysterious glances and cryptic warnings, and everyone around her acting like they had seen a ghost. No! I want answers right now! Who is this man? Why is everyone so afraid of him? Marcus Whitfield, who had been standing nearby with an expression of barely concealed dread, finally spoke. Our Mrs. Ashworth. His name is Keanu Reeves. He is the sole owner of Silverpine Holdings. The name hit Cordelia like a physical blow. She knew Silverpine Holdings. Of course she knew Silverpine Holdings. It was the company that owned the estate where she had lived for the past 6 years. The company to which she wrote a rent check every single month. Silverpine Holdings. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. The company that owns this property? Yes. Marcus's confirmation was gentle, almost pitying. He owns this estate, Mrs. Ashworth. You have been living in his house. No. Cordelia shook her head violently. No, that is impossible. We rent from a corporation, a faceless investment company. Not a man who looks like he shops at thrift stores. The man in the leather jacket spoke quietly, without malice. Appearances can be deceiving, Mrs. Ashworth. Cordelia turned to Cedric, desperation creeping into her voice. Tell me this is not true. Tell me they are lying. Cedric could not meet her eyes. Cordelia, I have known about this for 6 years, since I handled the lease renewal. You knew? The betrayal in her voice was raw and bleeding. You knew for 6 years that this man owned our home and you never told me. He is a client, Cordelia. Attorney-client privilege. He specifically requested that his identity remain confidential. Cedric swallowed hard. And frankly, you should be grateful for that confidentiality. Grateful. Why on earth should I be grateful? Cedric finally looked up, and there was something like pity in his eyes. 6 years ago, the previous owner of this estate decided to sell. The new buyer was planning to triple the rent or terminate your lease entirely. You would have lost this home. Cordelia felt her knees weaken. What? Mr. Reeves purchased the property and kept your rent at the same rate. He even reduced it when Ashworth Enterprises hit financial difficulties 3 years ago. Cedric's voice was barely above a murmur. He has been protecting you, Cordelia. All this time, the revelation hung in the air like smoke. The gathered crowd, which had been watching with the avid attention of spectators at a blood sport, had gone utterly silent. Even Beatrice and Reginald, who had been so eager to pile on criticism earlier, had taken several steps backward, as if proximity to Cordelia might somehow contaminate them. Edgar, the elderly groundskeeper, slowly made his way through the crowd. His cap was clutched in his weathered hands, and his face bore an expression of quiet resolve. Mrs. Ashworth, there is something I need to tell you as well. Cordelia turned to him, her eyes wild. Not you too, Edgar? Please tell me you are not part of this. I am sorry, Mom, but I must speak the truth. Edgar straightened his stooped shoulders. I work for Mr. Reeves. I have for the past 6 years. My salary comes from Silverpine Holdings, not from your household budget. But I thought, Hay asked me to stay on and care for the property, to make sure the gardens were maintained. The buildings were kept in good repair. Edgar's voice was gentle but firm. And to keep an eye on things, to report back if there were any problems. You were spying on me, Cordelia's voice cracked. Not spying, ma'am. Watching over. There is a difference. Edgar glanced at the man in the leather jacket with obvious respect. I tried to tell you about him several times over the years, about who really owned this place. But you never wanted to listen. You were always too busy with your social events and your important guests. Cordelia felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Everything she had believed about her life, her home, her place in the world, was crumbling like sand castles before a rising tide. Get out. Her voice was barely a whisper at first, then grew stronger. Get out! Both of you! All of you! Get off my property! The man rose slowly from his chair. When he spoke, his voice was calm and level, without a trace of anger or satisfaction. Mrs. Ashworth, this is not your property. It is mine. You are a tenant and Edgar is my employee. You do not have the authority to dismiss either of us. I. Cordelia could not form words. Her entire world was collapsing around her. Marcus stepped forward again, his expression grave. There is more, Mrs. Ashworth. I am sorry, but you need to hear all of it. More. What more could there possibly be? 4 years ago, when Ashworth Enterprises was on the verge of bankruptcy, an anonymous investor injected $10 million into the company. Do you remember? Cordelia nodded weakly. Of course she remembered. That investment had saved everything. Their business, their reputation, their way of life. They had never discovered who the mysterious benefactor was. Despite months of investigation, the anonymous investor was Mr. Reeves. Marcus let the words sink in. He now owns 55% of Ashworth Enterprises. He is, in effect, the majority shareholder of your family company. The blood drained from Cordelia's face. She reached for a nearby chair and sank into it, her legs no longer capable of supporting her weight. He owns everything. Her voice was hollow, stripped of all its earlier authority. The house, the company, everything we have. Everything you thought you had. Marcus corrected gently. Around them, the wedding guests had begun whispering among themselves, their earlier cruelty transformed into shocked disbelief. She insulted her own landlord. A owns her company, and she called him a vagrant. This is unbelievable. She is finished. The whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire, growing louder and more animated with each passing second. Beatrice had disappeared entirely. Reginald was studying his shoes with sudden intense interest. Clarissa and her friends had melted into the background, their mocking laughter silenced. Cordelia sat in her chair, tears beginning to stream down her face. Her perfect makeup ran in dark rivulets down her cheeks. The diamond necklace that had seemed so impressive an hour ago now felt like a chain around her neck. Why? She looked up at the man she had so thoroughly humiliated. Why would you do all this? Buy our home. Save our company. You do not even know us. The man was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of emotion that had been absent before. Mrs. Ashworth, I did not come here today to reclaim property or assert ownership. I came here for a different reason entirely. A reason that has everything to do with your son. Cordelia's head snapped up. Tristan. What does Tristan have to do with any of this? 7 years ago, I met your son under very particular circumstances. What I witnessed that day changed everything. It is the reason I bought this property. It is the reason I saved your company. He paused, his dark eyes meeting her tear-filled ones. Everything I have done for your family, I did because of Tristan. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the distant string quartet seemed to have stopped playing, as if the musicians themselves were straining to hear what would come next. Cordelia stared at the man, confusion and fear warring in her expression. You know my son? How? When? He never mentioned. He did not know who I was, not until a year ago, and I asked him to keep my identity private. The man looked toward the ceremonial area, where Tristan presumably still waited, unaware of the drama unfolding at the reception. The things I am about to tell you will explain everything, but I think they should come from Tristan himself. Tell me. Cordelia's voice was barely a whisper. Please, I need to understand. What happened 7 years ago? What did you do for my son? The man turned back to face her, and in his eyes she saw something she had not expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a deep, abiding sadness. 7 years ago, I watched your son do something extraordinary, something that nearly cost him his life. He paused, letting the words settle. I did not just meet Tristan that day, Mrs. Ashworth. I saved his life, and what I saw him do is the reason I have spent the last 7 years quietly protecting your family. Cordelia's hand flew to her mouth. Saved his... What are you talking about? What happened to my son? But before the man could answer, a commotion erupted near the ceremonial arch. A young man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo was pushing through the crowd, his face pale with alarm. Tristan Ashworth had finally learned what was happening at his own wedding reception, and he was running toward them as fast as his legs could carry him. Tristan Ashworth burst through the crowd like a man running from a fire, his perfectly tailored tuxedo jacket flying open, his carefully styled hair falling across his forehead. Vivian followed close behind, her white gown gathered in her hands to keep from tripping. But before he could reach the scene, Cordelia made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Everyone, please listen to me." Her voice was shrill, cracking at the edges. "This is all some elaborate scheme. This man has spent months researching our family to construct this fraud." She gestured wildly at the man in the leather jacket. "Think about it logically. If he really owned this property, if he was really so wealthy, why would he show up dressed like a homeless person? Where is his luxury car? Where are his bodyguards? Where are the trappings of real wealth?" A few guests nodded uncertainly. The familiar narrative of a con artist targeting respectable families resonated with their worldview. "He has fooled Marcus somehow. He has deceived Cedric. But I will not be manipulated." Cordelia's voice rose to near hysteria. "When this is over, I will sue him for defamation, emotional distress, and attempted fraud." The man in the leather jacket remained silent, watching her with an expression of profound sadness rather than anger. "Mother, what is going on here?" Tristan's voice cut through the chaos. He pushed through the final row of onlookers, his eyes scanning the scene with growing alarm. "Someone told me there was a confrontation. They said you were trying to have someone arrested." Cordelia reached for her son with trembling hands. "Tristan, darling, you do not understand. This man has been trying too." But Tristan was no longer looking at his mother. His gaze had found the man in the weathered leather jacket, and every drop of color drained from his face. For a long moment, Tristan simply stood there, frozen. Then, slowly, deliberately, he walked toward the man. The crowd parted before him like water. When he reached the table, Tristan did something that made the entire gathering gasp. He dropped to his knees. Right there, in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, on the grass of the estate, the groom knelt before the man everyone had been calling a vagrant. "Mr. Reeves." Tristan's voice was thick with emotion. "You came. You actually came." Cordelia's shriek pierced the air. "Tristan, what are you doing? Stand up this instant. Why are you kneeling before this person?" Tristan did not move. He remained on his knees, looking up at the man who had changed his life. "Mother, you do not understand." His voice was barely above a whisper. "This man is the reason I am alive." The man reached down and gently took Tristan's arm. "Stand up, Tristan. This is your wedding day. You should not be kneeling to anyone." Tristan rose slowly, but his eyes never left the man's face. "I have been waiting for you all afternoon. I was so afraid you would not come. I promised I would be here. I would never miss this day." Cordelia watched the exchange with mounting confusion. "Tristan, what is happening? You actually know this person. You actually invited him." Tristan finally turned to face his mother. His expression made her take an involuntary step backward. It was not anger exactly. It was something worse. It was disappointment so deep it looked like grief. "What did you do to him?" "Mother." Tristan's voice was quiet but carried across the silent gathering. "What exactly did you say to this man?" "I was protecting our family." "He showed up looking like a homeless person, and I simply asked him to leave. How was I supposed to know? Someone tell me exactly what happened." Tristan looked around at the assembled guests. "Tell me exactly what my mother said." A young server stepped forward nervously. "Sir, your mother called him a vagrant and a stray dog. She said he looked like he crawled out from under a highway overpass. She had security escort him out twice." Another voice added. She made sure no one would serve him or speak to him. The server continued. She told everyone he was probably here to steal things. Tristan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were bright with tears. Do you have any idea who this man is? His voice rose, addressing not just his mother but everyone present. Do you have any idea what he has done for me? For our family? I know now. Cordelia's voice cracked. But how could I have known before? Look at him. I am looking at him. Tristan turned to face the crowd. I am looking at the man who saved my life. And now I am going to tell you exactly how. The wedding guests fell absolutely silent. 7 years ago, I was driving through Los Angeles. It was an ordinary afternoon. Nothing special about it. Tristan paused, gathering himself. I stopped at a red light near a residential neighborhood. There was a little girl playing on the sidewalk, maybe 4 or 5 years old. She was chasing a red ball that had bounced into the street. Vivian moved closer to her husband, taking his hand. She had heard this story before, but it still made her heart ache. A delivery truck was coming. The driver did not see her. He was going too fast to stop. Tristan's voice trembled. I did not think. There was no time to think. I got out of my car and I ran. I pushed her out of the way. The little girl was fine. Not a scratch. But He swallowed hard. The truck hit me. I remember flying through the air. I remember the sound of my own bones breaking when I hit the pavement. I remember lying there, unable to move, convinced I was going to die. Cordelia's hand flew to her mouth. My spine was damaged. The doctors said I might never walk again. They said even if I did recover, it would take years of rehabilitation and cost more money than our family had. Tristan looked at the man in the leather jacket. But when I was lying on that street, in more pain than I had ever experienced, someone stopped. An old car, nothing fancy. A man got out and ran to me. He knelt beside me, took my hand, and called for an ambulance. He said something I will never forget. He said, "You are a hero. You saved that little girl, and I am going to make sure you get through this." He rode with me in the ambulance. He stayed at the hospital until I was out of surgery, and then he disappeared. Tristan's voice broke, but someone paid my medical bills. All of them. The surgery, the rehabilitation, the specialists. Over $2 million. We tried to find out who it was, but the payments came through an anonymous trust fund. For 2 years, I worked to walk again. From a wheelchair to crutches, from crutches to a cane, from a cane to my own feet. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. And every step of the way, I wondered who had given me this second chance. He turned to face the man directly. 1 year ago, I attended a charity gala in San Francisco. I was walking through the crowd when I saw a face I recognized instantly. A face I had never forgotten. I approached him and asked if we had met before. He tried to deflect, but I knew. I asked him directly, "Were you the one who saved me 7 years ago?" And do you know what he said? The crowd leaned in, hanging on every word. He said, "You deserve to be saved." Not many people would sacrifice themselves for a child they have never met. That kind of courage deserves to be protected. That is when I learned the full truth. Not just that he saved my life and paid for my recovery, but that he had been watching over our family ever since. He bought this estate to make sure we would not lose our home. He invested in our company to keep it from bankruptcy. He did all of this in secret, asking for nothing in return. Tristan turned back to his mother, and his expression was devastating. "Mother, for the past hour, you have been humiliating the man who gave me my legs. The man who gave me the ability to stand here today and marry the woman I love. You called him a vagrant, a thief, a stray dog. He gave our family everything, and you treated him like garbage." Tristan's voice cracked on the final words. "I love you, Mother. But today, I am ashamed to be your son." The words hit Cordelia like physical blows. She staggered backward, her legs giving way beneath her. She collapsed onto the grass, her designer gown pooling around her, her perfect facade completely shattered. "I did not know." The words came out as broken sobs. "Tristan, I swear I did not know." "You did not know because you never asked. You looked at his clothes and decided he was worth less. You did not give him a chance to explain." Around them, the wedding guests stood in stunned silence. Many had participated in the mockery. Now they stood with heads bowed, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Vivian stepped forward, her bridal veil trailing behind her. She approached the man with tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Reeves, I have wanted to meet you for a year. Ever since Tristan told me what you did for him." She took his weathered hands in her delicate ones. "You gave me my husband. Without you, he might not be here. He might never have walked again. He might never have been able to dance with me at our wedding." Her voice softened. "And I understand now why Tristan is the way he is. Why he never judges anyone by their appearance. Why he always sees the person inside, not the clothes outside. He learned that from you." She looked up at him with profound gratitude. "I do not care what you are wearing. You are the most important guest at this wedding." The man smiled gently. "Thank you, Vivian. I can see why Tristan loves you." Around them, the social order had completely collapsed. Beatrice had vanished. Reginald was edging toward the parking lot. Clarissa and her friends had scattered like frightened birds. Only Cordelia remained, crumpled on the grass, her body shaking with sobs. "Please." Her voice was a broken whisper. "Please, Mr. Reeves, I am so sorry. I judged you by your appearance, and I was so terribly wrong." She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "You saved my son. You saved our home. You saved our company. And I treated you like garbage. I do not know how I can ever make this right." The man looked down at the woman who had spent the past hour trying to destroy him. He could have left her there. He could have walked away. He had every right to be angry, to demand retribution. Instead, he extended his hand. "Stand up, Mrs. Ashworth." Cordelia looked at his hand as if it might disappear. "Kneeling will not change what happened, and it will not fix what needs to be fixed." She took his hand, and he helped her to her feet. Her legs were unsteady, her body trembling. The crowd watched in breathless anticipation. They had witnessed Cordelia's cruelty and her downfall. Now they waited to see what would happen next. What would this man do with the power he held over the Ashworth family? The man helped Cordelia to her feet, his grip firm but gentle. She stood before him on unsteady legs, her designer gown stained with grass, her perfect makeup ruined by tears. The woman who had commanded this estate like a queen now looked like a shipwreck survivor. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not leaving me there." The man released her hand and took a step back. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent gathering with quiet authority. "Mrs. Ashworth, I did not come here today to humiliate you. I did not come here to reclaim property or assert ownership. I came here because your son invited me to witness the happiest day of his life." He paused, letting the words settle. But what I witnessed, instead, was something else entirely. I witnessed how people treat those they perceive as beneath them. I witnessed cruelty disguised as social propriety. I witnessed judgment based on nothing more than the clothes a person wears. His eyes moved across the crowd, and many guests looked away, unable to meet his gaze. When I walked through those gates today, I was wearing the same clothes I wear every day. An old jacket, faded jeans, comfortable boots. Nothing about who I am had changed. My bank account was the same. My history was the same. The things I have done for this family were the same. But because of what I was wearing, you decided I was worthless. You decided I was a thief, a vagrant, a stray dog looking for scraps. You did not ask my name. You did not ask why I was here. You simply looked at my clothes and made your judgment. Cordelia flinched with each word, but the man was not finished. "Let me ask you something, Mrs. Ashworth. If I had arrived in a limousine wearing a $3,000 suit and a Rolex watch, how would you have treated me?" Cordelia opened her mouth, but no words came out. You would have welcomed me with open arms. You would have offered me champagne and introduced me to your important friends. You would have been charming and gracious and warm. His voice softened. Not because I deserved it more, but because I looked the part. That is the lesson I want everyone here to understand. True character is not revealed by how you treat people who can help you. It is revealed by how you treat people you think cannot. He turned to address the broader crowd. Many of you participated in what happened today. You laughed at the jokes. You added your own insults. You made sure I knew exactly how little you thought of me. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Clarissa, who had tried to hide behind a group of older women, looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. I am not going to name you. I am not going to demand apologies. But I am going to ask you to remember this day the next time you encounter someone who does not they belong in your world. Does not like they belong in your world. Remember that the homeless man on the corner might have been a professor. Before illness took everything from him. Remember that the janitor cleaning your office might be putting 3 children through college. Remember that the person in old clothes at a fancy wedding might be the one who owns the entire estate. You never know someone's story just by looking at them, and you never know what they might mean to the people you love. He turned back to Cordelia. Now, about your situation. I have the power to take back this house today. I have the legal right to sell my shares in your company and watch it collapse. I could destroy everything you have built with a single phone call. Cordelia trembled visibly. But I am not going to do that. The relief that flooded her face was almost painful to witness. Not because you deserve mercy, not because your behavior today was forgivable, but because of Tristan. He looked at the young man who stood with his arm around his bride. 7 years ago, I watched your son do something extraordinary. He saw a child in danger, and he did not hesitate. He did not calculate the risks. He did not consider whether that little girl was worth saving. He simply acted because that is who he is. That kind of courage, that kind of selflessness, is rare, and it deserves to be protected. Tristan's eyes glistened with tears. The little girl your son saved that day is 12 years old now. She is healthy and happy. She wants to be a doctor when she grows up. She has a whole life ahead of her because your son was willing to sacrifice his own. That is the legacy of your family, Mrs. Ashworth. Not this house. Not your company. Not your social standing. Your son's courage. That is what matters. Kunu reached into the pocket of his worn leather jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. However, I do have some conditions for allowing your family to continue living here and maintaining your stake in the company. Cordelia nodded frantically. Anything. I will do anything. First, you will personally apologize to Edgar and every member of your staff that you have mistreated. Not just today, but over the years. And from now on, you will treat them with the respect they deserve as human beings. Yes, yes, of course. Second, the Ashworth family will establish a scholarship fund of $500,000 for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. It will be called the Second Chance Foundation because everyone deserves a second chance. Tristan stepped forward. We will do it. Vivian and I will personally oversee it. Third, you, Mrs. Ashworth, will spend 20 hours each month volunteering at a homeless shelter, not writing checks, not attending charity galas, actually working, serving meals, talking to people, learning their stories. Cordelia swallowed hard but nodded. You need to see these people as human beings, not as problems to be avoided. You need to understand that poverty is not a character flaw and wealth is not a virtue. I understand. I will do it. Fourth, for the next year, you will not purchase any luxury items. No designer bags, no expensive jewelry, no new cars. The money you would have spent will be donated to charity. This condition clearly stung, but Cordelia nodded again. And finally, the most important condition of all. The crowd leaned in. Every time you meet someone who looks different from you, someone who does not fit your idea of success, someone you might have dismissed before today, you will stop and ask yourself one question. What is their story? You will treat them with basic human dignity, not because they might be secretly wealthy, not because they might be able to help you someday, but because they are human beings, and every human being deserves respect. If you violate any of these conditions, I will know, and I will take back everything. Cordelia looked at the man who held her family's fate in his hands. The man she had called a vagrant, the man she had tried to have arrested, the man who had every reason to destroy her, but was choosing mercy instead. I accept all of your conditions, she said, her voice steady for the first time since her world had collapsed. And I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to become worthy of the second chance you are giving me. She turned to Edgar, who still stood nearby with his cap in his weathered hands. Edgar, I am so sorry. For today, for every day before today, for every time I treated you like you did not matter. Her voice broke. You matter. You have always mattered, and I was too blind to see it. Edgar's eyes filled with tears. I forgive you, Mrs. Ashworth. I truly do. Tristan approached the man and embraced him tightly. Thank you for saving my life, for protecting my family, for being here today, for everything. The man hugged him back. You do not need to thank me, Tristan. You repaid any debt long ago, on that street in Los Angeles, when you proved what kind of man you are. The little girl you saved is 12 now. Do you know what she wants to be? Tristan shook his head. A doctor. She wants to save lives, just like you saved hers. That is your legacy, Tristan. That is what matters. Vivian joined the embrace, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for giving me my husband. We will continue what you started. We will help others the way you helped us. The man smiled warmly at the young couple. That is all I ever wanted. Not gratitude, not recognition, just for the kindness to continue. He buttoned his worn leather jacket and looked around at the gathered crowd one final time. I am going to leave now. This is Tristan and Vivian's day, and they deserve to celebrate without any more drama. He began walking toward the gate, his old boots crunching softly on the gravel path. Mr. Reeves, wait, Cordelia called out. Will you not stay? Please, you are the most important guest here. You should be at the head table. The man turned back with a gentle smile. I appreciate the invitation, Mrs. Ashworth, but I prefer to keep a low profile. That is just who I am. He nodded to Edgar as he passed. Take care of this place, Edgar. You have done a beautiful job. Always, sir, always. At the gate, he paused and looked back at the estate one final time. The sun was beginning to set over the Carmel Valley hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The string quartet had started playing again, a soft melody that drifted across the manicured lawns. Then he walked through the gate, climbed into his old car, and drove away down the winding country road, disappearing into the California sunset. Behind him, he left a wedding that would be remembered for generations, not for the flowers or the food or the expensive decorations, but for the lesson that everyone present would carry with them for the rest of their lives. In the weeks that followed, Cordelia kept every one of her promises. She apologized to each member of her staff, personally and sincerely. She began volunteering at a homeless shelter in San Francisco, awkward and uncomfortable at first, but gradually learning to see the people there as individuals with stories and struggles and dreams. The Second Chance Foundation was established within a month, with Tristan and Vivian serving as its directors. Its first scholarship went to a young woman whose single mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Within a year, it had helped dozens of students pursue their dreams. As for the others who had participated in that day's cruelty, the consequences varied. Beatrice lost several important social connections when word spread about her behavior. Reginald was quietly removed from the board of a prominent charity. Clarissa, to everyone's surprise, actually reached out to apologize and ended up becoming a regular volunteer at the same shelter where Cordelia worked. Some people changed. Some did not. But none of them ever forgot. This story makes me think about something important. We live in a world that teaches us to judge people by their appearance. A nice suit opens doors. A worn jacket closes them. We learn to read wealth in watches and handbags and the cut of someone's clothes, and we treat people accordingly. But here is the thing about that system. It tells us nothing about who a person really is. It tells us nothing about their character, their history, their struggles, their triumphs. It just tells us how much money they had when they got dressed that morning. Cordelia Ashworth was not a monster. She was a product of a society that equates net worth with human worth. She had spent her whole life surrounded by people who believed the same thing, who reinforced those beliefs at every turn. It took a complete collapse of everything she thought she knew to make her see the truth. And what was that truth? That the man in the old leather jacket, the man she dismissed as garbage, was the same man who had saved her son's life and quietly protected her family for 7 years. That appearances mean nothing. That kindness can come from anywhere. That the measure of a person has nothing to do with the labels on their clothes. What strikes me most about this story is not the revelation of who Kinu really was. It is what he chose to do with his power once everyone knew. He could have destroyed Cordelia. He had every right to. Instead, he offered her something far more valuable than revenge. The opportunity to become a better person. That is real strength. Not the power to tear down, but the power to build up. Not the satisfaction of punishment, but the harder, slower work of transformation. This story leaves us with questions worth considering. When you see someone dressed in old clothes, what do you assume about them? Do you see a person with a story, or do you see a category to be dismissed? How do you treat the people who serve you? The waiters, the janitors, the groundskeepers. Do you see them as human beings worthy of respect, or as background characters in your life? And, perhaps most importantly, what would it take for you to change the way you see the world? Remember that every person you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about. The homeless veteran on the corner. The tired cashier at the grocery store. The quiet stranger at a party who does not seem to fit in. They all have stories. They all have worth. And they all deserve to be treated with dignity. Do not judge a book by its cover. And more than that, do not judge a person by their clothes. Because you never know. The person you dismiss today might be the one who saves your life tomorrow. If this story made you think, share your thoughts in the comments below. And do not forget to subscribe for more stories about kindness, second chances, and the things that truly matter in life.